Hey guys, how are we doing? Welcome to another MLS Updater with me, Mike. And today I am joined with by Manuel Veth. Manuel, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing, Mike? It's fun to finally do this.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining. I'm doing great here, having just been through the stressful experience that was the USMNT game. How did you enjoy watching the game to start with? A big win for the US, and maybe just remind people a bit about yourself before we kick off and get on with this podcast.
Yeah, those who don't know me, I'm the area manager for Transfermarkt, also the host of the Gegenpressing podcast that's more focused on German football, right? But for Transfermarkt, I oversee the growth and expansion of Transfermarkt in North America. I'm based in Canada myself, so a bit more, I always have, being a German Canadian citizen, Canada is obviously already out, but because we oversee the growth in the US as well, always keeping an eye on what the US men's national team is doing. And yeah, the game, I thought it was a bit closer to comfort maybe
Yeah.
than many expected. Iran didn't exactly have the best start into the tournament, did they? And then really came back with a strong performance against Wales, and maybe with a little luck, get the draw in the end there. I haven't seen the penalty decision at the very end that was claimed, but look, I think for the US, I think they're quite happy to get out of this group. That was not a given considering the way they started against Wales and against England, getting a draw, a 0-0 draw, right? So getting that 1-0 result is huge for them. Of course, we all now are waiting to see what happens with Christian Pulisic, who is in hospital, right? Abdominal scans, that sounds scary. I have, by the time of recording, of course, we don't know what's going on, but I don't know how you saw that particular moment. I was surprised that they wouldn't let him back on the pitch at all.
Yeah, see, he seemed like he was struggling a lot after converting that goal. And I guess if it was maybe at a different point of the game, maybe they would have just said, let's bring him off, we'll take a little bit longer and maybe make that change. But leading into half time, it seemed like they were hoping for the best and giving him a chance to see if he can run it off, as they say. But yeah, hopefully, yeah, fingers crossed for him that everything will be as minimal as possible so that he can still be competing.
Yeah, they will need him. You said it before the show, right? Netherlands is next.
Yeah.
You would think that without Christian Pulisic, this team would probably struggle. I mean, they will struggle against the Netherlands anyways. The Netherlands are really good, but without Pulisic, I think this becomes a lot harder.
Yeah, definitely. We saw obviously Brendan Aronson came in for him, and he provides a similar role, but just not quite maybe as physical off the ball. He's a much slighter build. Pulisic does a lot more than just be that playmaker in the for the USMNT than what sometimes he's expected for. So he does bring that extra part to them, which obviously he's brought from years playing in the Bundesliga and the Premier League as well.
Right. Yeah.
But we kicked off the game without a single MLS player after Zimmerman was replaced. So let's focus on the first half to start with. Cameron Carter-Vickers brought in to replace Zimmerman. It's another game for the USMNT without conceding a goal from open play, just that penalty from Bale. So it seems like Berhalter got the plan right to a degree. Maybe Carter-Vickers provided a little bit more pace at the back there, dealing with the counter-attack, do you think?
Well, the experience, right, from playing in Scotland, I think that's quite big too. The thing is I mean, it's not necessarily that Scotland is. We get this argument a lot because Alistair Johnston is going to Celtic, right, from Montreal, and it's not necessarily that he's going to a bigger league, but he's going to a club where he plays in the Champions League, and I think that is really what is quite important because when you play Champions League minutes, you used to compete on this big stage, and you used to do this group stage, although on Champions League the margins are a little bit bigger than they are in this because you have a return fixture. But at the same time, I think you know how to deal with pressure a bit different, right? Because you have this kind of knockout stage kind of feeling when you play for a big club like Celtic, and they are a huge club. I think anyone who's aware of the magnitude that it has. I mean, I experienced it this week when I broke the Johnson story, and God, my Twitter didn't sleep for days. You realize how big of a club they are, right? But I think that's really important to understand here. I think that these MLS guys do offer quite a lot of quality. I think that Walker Zimmerman is a really good player. I think this was not his best MLS season.
No.
But if you do play for a club like Celtic in the Champions League, and you face an Iran side that has literally the knife between the teeth going into this match, the experience that you get from playing in the Champions League, the experience that you get from playing against in the old firm against Rangers, I think that gives you that little bit of an edge. And I completely understood the decision here. And Tim Ream has been a really great story as well.
Fantastic.
Getting promoted with Fulham. He was pretty much out of the club when they got relegated, wasn't he? And played a really big role for them in the Championship, and has played a really big role for them in the Premier League this year. Fair enough for him to get that position. Age doesn't matter in a short tournament like that if you're match fit. And I understood Berhalter's decisions here. What I find more interesting, and I'm curious about your take on this, is up front with Jesus Ferreira. He made under Berhalter, and he was heavily criticized for this, rightfully so at times. Ferreira always played almost every single game. And then all of a sudden, it's the second guy in a row he drops. First, he drops Ricardo Pepi, and then he drops Jesus Ferreira now. And I think that's a really interesting storyline.
Yeah, me too. I mean, like you say, in those qualifiers, he seemed to have cemented his place. Haji Wright had chances in the team and was left out in some games. Pepe brought back in to give him an opportunity, but left out of the World Cup squad. And so there's been all this sort of change around. The Sargent's come back in, who's been in and out of the squad in sort of qualifiers, and took that role, which I thought he played in very well today. He was needed as someone to work hard in that centre forward role where there wasn't so much space. The wide players were finding all the space. Timothy Ware with his movement, and Pulisic arriving in that first half in different spaces. They were the ones who were the more dangerous in the attacking phase. But especially as we got into that second half and Sargent went down, I thought that was when we'd probably see Ferreira, for the fact that his defensive work as a forward at Dallas has been fantastic. He works so incredibly, works the defenders so much, and he doesn't give them a moment's peace, which Haji Wright didn't do in this second half. And if Berhalter's holding on to a lead, I would have thought this would be the time where we probably would have seen him.
Yeah, maybe, but I just think it's so telling that we didn't, and you wonder now what the role is going to be for him going forward in this tournament, right? If they by some miracle beat the Dutch, who I rated really highly going in this tournament. I know a lot of people will say, okay, wow, they didn't exactly play the best football here, but I know I've lived in Amsterdam, and I'm from Munich originally, so I have had my run-ins with Louis van Gaal in this environment, and he's a manager that gets the most out of any team, and it's not always pretty, right? And it's still very effective, and I think he's an excellent manager, and he's probably one of the best managers at this tournament period. And Cody Gakpo, they have a very much informed striker, which is another thing that is kind of a little bit of a rarity, right? So I think it's going to be very difficult. So I'm really curious to see how he's going to adapt the side to what's coming next. And if Josh Sargent, I'm not sure what his prognosis is.
No,
I don't know if you saw anything. I mean, we're recording this 45 minutes after the game. So excuse us for anything that comes after. But I think that Josh Sargent actually was quite excellent. There was a time when he was at Werder Bremen when a lot of people compared him to Rudi Völler. And that was, of course, a heavy load for him, right? And he then went to Norwich, which I think still to this day, is a move that I find quite odd, even though he's doing quite well now and playing for that club. But and especially when you see that Werder Bremen have just produced a German national team striker, right?
Exactly.
So but I do think in this game you saw the importance that he can provide, because he's so very hardworking. His finishing isn't always world class, but he does provide you with quite a lot of depth and quite a high work rate. And yeah, you worry what happens if he's out, because like Hachu Wright plays. Oh my God, remind me of the Turkish team he plays for.
Antalyaspor.
Antalyaspor, thank you. Yeah.
So.
So that's not exactly a top side. I hope you don't have too many Turkish listeners. I can say but that's not exactly a top side either. And the problem of Jesus Ferreira is he hasn't really been playing in a month, right?
No.
So do you throw him in now? Yeah, it's a really big one. That forward line looks weak if Pulisic and Sargent are out for the next game.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, Timothy Weah's obviously got the goal against Wales and has looked dangerous a lot with his pace, but sometimes his touch let him down in this game. Sometimes his runs aren't quite in sync with some of the other players.
Can we talk about Weah for a moment? Because he's a fabulous player.
Yeah.
I mean, like, he's a guy that's been often miscast at Lille this year, playing as a right wing back, but I think this position in the national teams actually shows the potential that he has as a player. And you almost hope that he gets better utilized in his club squad, because he's a fabulous player, and you just want to see a guy like that be developed in the right way. I think this World Cup has been really his. He's done a lot with the time that was given to him on the field.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, the timing of that run for the Wales goal was absolutely perfect, and it with Pulisic, and the fact that they sort of altered their formation as well, as they're out of possession going into more of a 4-4-2, and Weah gets to come involved, and he gets to move off of that flank and come inside and create sort of danger for these sides with his skill and pace. There was a breakaway which I think him and Sargent went 2-on-2 through, and he just couldn't. The two of them couldn't quite work out their runs to be able to give the US that second goal during the second half, but otherwise he seems to. Berhalter seems to have found a much better way of using him, I think, than obviously, like you say, he's being used at Lille.
Yeah, it's an interesting one.
But we had. But we had. So they held on. It got very stressful towards the end of that second half. From an MLS side, Kellen Acosta was brought back in, and we had that opportunity. Musa had a free kick, which he appeared to take off Kellen Acosta towards the end of that game. Were you a bit surprised after Acosta making a name for himself somewhat this season from the Dead Balls?
I'm not surprised that Gio Reyna didn't come on.
True.
Let's milk that controversy a little bit, shall we? Because this is now he came on in the second game, made his World Cup debut. Just going through my substitution, it's kind of crazy now that they're allowed to do 5. I have to make sure that I actually got them all right. No, he did not come on.
No.
So let's milk this controversy a little bit, shall we? Why is Gio Reyna not on the side? Why is he not playing more? And is this Berhalter still trying to squeeze in an MLS guy whenever it's possible?
Possibly. I guess the first point where we thought we'd saw him was when Pulisic goes down. I think the argument has been, I can't play Gio Reyna because he sits in Pulisic's role to a degree, I guess. But as Pulisic went down, Aronson's the one who's brought in to replace, and again holding on to the game. He seemed to bring on Kellen Acosta, who's more of a defensive minded midfielder compared with Gio Reyna, but the quality is very different, you'd say.
I just don't understand some of the decision making here. I mean, it works out in the end. I think that they're just one bad decision of officiating decision away from going out here.
Yeah.
Right.
Which, like we said before, with the possible penalty in the 98th minute, if it was the other way around, the US would have been screaming as well. I
don't know. It's an interesting one. I mean, I'm not American. I don't have to suffer through this as much as some of my colleagues do. So I'm just like looking at this as a rational look. I think Berhalter got the lineup almost completely right here. I think where he then does struggle is when he has to make the substitutions, right? But obviously Pulisic has to come off. I was surprised that he didn't come off earlier. Acosta, that's the one I don't understand. And then, like, of course, he brings on Zimmerman as well towards the end. Again, this is a substitution I guess he has to make because of the defensive shape and trying to absorb the pressure, right? But you find yourself in a situation where you're beating Iran just 1-0.
Yeah.
Right. And in a must-win game. Whew.
Yeah, and with sort of 80 minutes on the clock, that's when he went to that back five and brought on Shakmore and Zimmerman and has decided to absorb pressure. And we know how long these games have been going on in the World Cup. The stoppage time is very well managed to a degree. So there's even more. There's nearly 20 minutes that the side had to just sit and defend. And you think
it's kind of crazy. Now you're at the 80-minute mark and you're like, there's another 20 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, you're getting your money's worth in the stadium, I guess.
Yeah, you do, I guess. I mean, these people paid a lot of money to live in the desert, so
Yeah.
in some sort of container. So yeah, I guess you have to milk it as much as possible.
True. But I guess that's where Geo Radio could have come in. They needed that player
Yeah.
to keep hold of the ball.
Well, get for yourself an attacking outlet, right? As
Yeah.
well. That's another thing. Yeah, it's this whole Reina thing. I guess it's really hard to see what's actually going on behind closed doors too. I mean, we're all sitting out and we're all sitting on the sideline, essentially judging a team and its chemistry from there.
Yeah.
And there's been some comments made in American media. I think Eric Vinalda was one of them that spoke out, right, and had to actually retract a lot of it because some of it was personal text messages. I believe it was.
Yeah.
But you're still looking in from the inside out, and you're like, it's kind of confusing.
Yeah.
Oh well.
Yeah, from an English point of view, I guess it's looking back at that times when it was trying to crowbar Steven Gerrard and Frank Lampard into the same team and affecting. And I guess in some ways, Berhalter's struggling with that, knowing how to fit more of these fit Reina in without affecting the midfield. And maybe he just doesn't have that. He doesn't have that answer, it seems, which is why we haven't seen him. But yeah, like we say, they progressed though. It's continuing to go well for the USMNT. They'll go up against Netherlands, as we said. Both sides only conceded the one goal, but the Netherlands much more dangerous in attack. So it will be interesting to see how he goes up against, sets his 11 up for that game. Do you think he'll continue with the same starting 11 should Pulisic and Sargent be fit?
It's like it feels like a million days away.
When it's only about 4.
Is it really only 4?
I think it's comes around so far, 4 or 5, I think.
Oh man, yeah, it's a good question. It's really hard to read Berhalter at times, right? What he actually ends up doing, but I think this formations work quite well for him. I'm not sure you can play this sort of attacking football though for 4-3-3 against the Netherlands side that's a lot more progressive.
Yeah.
My gut feeling is that he will go more defensive here. Whether that is actually a good thing or not is another question. But when you see Berhalter and the way he lines up his sides, he might just try to go defensive here, trying to outthink Louis van Gaal, which. Oh gosh!
It's a bold way to go about it.
Other people have tried and miserably failed to outthink Louis van Gaal. It's I don't know. It's going to be really interesting. I mean, he could go back with almost like a back five, right? 3 in the back and then 2 wing backs, but he could also just stick with what worked in this game. I mean. Knowing now that I guess a draw would be enough, but to get you at least into extra time. Yeah, it's going to be a really fascinating game, I think, against the Dutch, who I still think are a sleeper in this tournament.
Yeah, they've definitely, obviously, they're not as as favored as they have been in the past with the superstars that much have produced and the great teams they've
when
had.
they're the most dangerous.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, like you say with Louis van Gaal, he's been there and done that when it comes to anything football. So he'll be is a difficult person to go up against. And I guess Berhalter will take a lot of confidence from how they performed against England. Slightly different teams, obviously, to the Netherlands, but the US defended very well in the system that he adopted. So I'm kind of thinking he'll use a similar system as well. But yeah, I guess it all depends on those injuries to Sargent and Pulisic and as to how he's going to have to adapt to that. But it'll be very interesting to see, like you say. The other side in the group with an MLS player, Gareth Bale, Wales limped out to a 3-0 defeat. They held on in the first half, 0-0. Bale went off and England immediately hit back, I think, in the first 5 minutes with 2 goals, ended up 3-0 winners. It was interesting to see Bale getting 2.5 games in this World Cup on the pitch. I really did not expect to see that.
You didn't think that he would get more minutes, less minutes?
I thought he would get less, to be honest. I thought after the first game, maybe he would have then be rested slightly more in the second.
The entire purpose of the LAFC trip was to play in this World Cup.
True. But I didn't see him while watching him in that first game. He didn't look like the goal of what being at LAFC of becoming fit. It didn't look like he'd achieved that. I wrote a little while ago about how what he was trying to get out of it, becoming fit for the team. Wales knew that that was important for them, but from Gareth Bale it was also a point of enjoying football again, at least one last time. He seemed to have completely fallen out of the game to a degree while at Real Madrid, so many issues happening there. And to be able to go into the tournament, I think from an LAFC point of view, they've helped him that way mentally. He seemed much more happier in the game, and that's a massive benefit to Wales. They needed a Gareth Bale who was always going to be desperate to do everything he could for his country, but he was in a much better mindset, I think. But I don't feel like he physically got to where he hoped he would have been going into this tournament.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I was at that final in LA, and I wrote before the final that the entire purpose of him signing for LA, if he helps them win an MLS Cup, the signing was a success. And for Bale, if he gets a few minutes here and there and plays and is ready for the World Cup, it was a success for him. And I think you can now look back and say that's exactly what happened. He does he comes on and scores that really crucial goal for them to send the game into penalties.
Yeah.
It was his heroics and Maxime Crépeau essentially sacrificing his leg to win them the MLS Cup. And I guess at that, for LAFC, you can now say, okay, well, that's a success. For him, I think for Wales, there was always the realization that in this group, they were always going to be an outsider. Anyone who looked at this group probably looked at this group and said England and US will probably go through. And as long as Bale isn't hurt and had meaningful minutes to go into this tournament, we'll have a chance. Okay, that didn't happen. He scores that one World Cup goal, sort of fulfilling, I guess, his dream, cementing his legend as a Wales, or cementing his status as a Wales legend. Let's say it that way. I don't know. I look at this and say this Welsh team is very poor. I see in a tweet today saying it's probably the second worst team at the World Cup, the other one being Qatar.
Yeah.
And yes, that's true. And I think this is maybe where we have to put all the other performances into perspective in this group stage, and that includes US not getting a win against them. Right. That's a criticism. That also includes the fact that England's win might look a little bit more inflated than it actually is. So it's a really interesting one, because when you look at this group, it's actually a weak group, right? It's England, and then there's a huge gap, then it's US, and then it's an even bigger gap to the bottom. And that's by no disrespect to Iran, who obviously had a huge fight in this game and did quite well in this group. But I think we have to see everything in the context of that. And I think that these 3 games were a bonus for Bale, a player who he probably didn't expect to ever be at the World Cup. That's at least what I think, right?
Yeah, I guess so. It's been so long for the country to be able to qualify, and he was always going to play a big part. Obviously he's a complete legend at the club, and just sometimes maybe I could have seen them using a bit more pace with players like Dan James, maybe used in sort of a rotation with him just to manage Bale's minutes a bit better and maybe get more out of him throughout, rather than because I think they would have liked to have got a bit more than a 3-0 defeat to England, just for rivalry's sake, more than anything else. But do you think, putting you on the spot, do you think we'll see much from him in MLS come 2023?
I'm not even sure he's going to be back.
No.
I mean, he didn't really answer any of those questions. I guess we'll have to see. It's going to be, I mean, I could see him retire.
Yeah. I think he's got what he's probably hoped for at football now, and got to finish it in the way that he wanted to. And maybe that extra year in MLS is just not really necessary for him. And at least now he can go out on a World Cup with a goal. But at the other end, on the other side of the games, we had the final one was Senegal going through and knocking out Ecuador. Ecuador only needed a draw, but they couldn't hold off the Senegal side. Cifuentes, another LAFC player, came on. He couldn't help his side get that second goal to draw level, but he's had a very impressive year at LAFC, and someone who's really put himself in the shop window, you think, over this come the winter transfer market in Europe.
Yeah, we just updated his value to what I think it was 15 million euros. I should know this because I was the final person to put it in. Let me just double check that before I say something that's not true. Let me check that. Cifuentes, yes, no, 12 million euros. So there you go, double check that. But I think he's an immense player. I said to you before the show, I didn't watch this game. It's not quite true. I watched the last 20-25 minutes of it. Obligations earlier in the morning meant that I wasn't able to watch the full game. But this group was actually sneakily difficult. Of course, you had Qatar. The reaction says it all. But Ecuador and Senegal, despite not having Sadio Mane, I think they're the AFCON champions. Exactly. Ecuador is a country that's currently has a golden generation. You just look at Cifuentes, who was one of the most in-demand defensive midfielders in the world, right? Who probably will command a huge transfer fee for LAFC. And he's not even in the starting 11.
Exactly.
Right. So this is a really, really incredibly deep team. And Senegal and the Netherlands go out. I mean, the Netherlands, again, probably the team, the best team in this group. We've spoken plenty about them already, but Senegal also a really good team. And it's kind of like a shame that one of those 3 wouldn't go out of this group, right? But look, I think that Ecuador has a very bright future. This is a very young side. There's a lot of guys that we cover in MLS on a regular basis, right? And there's a lot more coming because MLS has sort of discovered this as a country where they can find talent on a relatively good price and develop them and then move them on.
Exactly.
Which is I think what we're going to see with Cifuentes. So his future is bright. I think the country's future is quite bright too, because there's Caicedo as well, who is just a phenomenal football player, right?
Brilliant. And you've got like Hincapié at the back there. And all very young players, all in their early 20s. So there'll no doubt be a very, very dangerous side in 2026 once again. I'm sure they'll be back, especially with the expanded format of the World Cup when it comes to Canada, the US, and Mexico. But they're an exciting team to see. I think we'll have to see how they cope with trying to replace Enner Valencia, who's been in incredible form for his country.
Well, who knows? Maybe he's still around by then.
Possibly, yeah. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see how that goes. But Michael Estrada obviously had that stint at DC United. He was the one who was used more frequently in the Ecuador side up front. We'll have to see what happens. Have to see what happens with them. But I'm sure we'll see them come by. But
yeah.
Thank you, Manuel. Those are the games for that. There are 4 games today, so we've got our next round all set up from these 2 groups, and we've got the rest of the week to finalize the rest. But thank you so much for joining me today. Just remind everyone where they could maybe follow you on Twitter and everything else. Will you work from there?
Yeah, so I work for Transfermarkt. We used to have a Twitter page. Musk accidentally shut it down today. So I'm still on Twitter, under @Manuel Veth, until I get shut down by Musk. Yeah, a lot of my work is there, and then I also have the Gegenpressing podcast / Substack with Stefan Bienkowski, where we cover mostly German football. Right, my other love. We bring weekly content to that page. I just did a bunch of articles for that on the time that I spent in the US with German teams there. And so you can find that as well. That's under @Gegenpress_pod if you want to follow that. And then of course Transfermarkt. We do have another English account that's still up and running. Musk only shut down those that don't have a tick. Yes. So yeah, this is where you can find me, where you can find all my work. We just had the USL market value update, so that might be an interesting one for some listeners. Joshua Winder going to 1 million euros.
Excellent. Well, definitely, yeah, we'll link that in as we get this out on Twitter, hopefully later this evening. And it's really great to talk to you, and hopefully talk to you again soon.
Definitely, anytime.
Brilliant. Thanks, Manuel.